Thank you all for joining today's presentation, which is going to be on SocGhoulish, which is a really common malware loader that we're seeing with quite frequency on customer incidents. So my name's Chris Morgan. I work for a company called ReliQuest. If you've not had a chance to speak to our guys downstairs, absolutely go and do so. We're a market leader in XDR, really helping our customers improve their visibility of threats, but also manage those threats as well. So thank you very much for joining this presentation. Just a show of hands, who's actually heard of SocGhoulish here? Oh, quite a few of you then. Okay, good stuff. So that's off to a good start then. So this is the agenda of what we'll be covering today. We'll be quickly discussing, what is a malware loader, introducing SocGhoulish, which is also known as fake updates. We'll be talking through a typical kill chain and also some new behaviors that we've seen associated with this malware loader. And then we'll talk about the association with ransomware activity as well. So obviously I'm in quite a learned group here, so I'm not going to harbour on this point too long. But in short, a malware loader is a piece of software that's designed to act as a conduit in dropping other malicious artifacts, other malicious software on your estate and then execute it. It does this a number of different ways, but it primarily acts as the main way in a multi-stage attack, mostly to facilitate initial access, but also persistence on compromised devices, and employing sophisticated techniques to actually avoid your incident responders as well. So avoiding what we're doing. That might be a number of different ways, from like obfuscation techniques or kind of living off the land using native tools. But in short, malware loaders are there to try and deliver other malware, whatever that might be, onto a target system. In terms of SocGhoulish, which, as you can see, also known as fake updates, this has been around since 2019. So it's not a new thing. It's actually quite an old bit of kit, to be honest with you. This is a JavaScript-based initial access, remote access Trojan that essentially stands out because it mimics legitimate software updates through compromised websites. So it might be a browser update. It might be, if you've ever been onto one of those dodgy torrenting sites or a streaming service, not that I would ever do that, of course, and I wouldn't recommend that you do that. But if you ever go to one of those and it pops up with, update your JavaScript here or update your Adobe Flash, whatever it might be, that's the kind of thing that it propagates through. SocGhoulish is often referred to as an attack framework because it's a technique that can be easily customized and changed by whatever cyber criminal is actually trying to use it. We've seen SocGhoulish associated with pretty much a who's who of ransomware activity, from, if we go back in time, Maze, Egregor, the Revil group, which obviously many of you will probably have heard of, all of the subsequent Revil groups. Many of these have actually been using SocGhoulish in live attacks. Many of the more recent ransomware groups as well. So it's really an interesting piece of kit, and kind of crucial to understand because we think it represents a really significant change in the way that threat actors are actually gaining initial access. Very, very highly successful because it's employing these social engineering techniques that many of you will have heard in the other presentations today. So I sat in the presentation with Ian Thornton-Trump, and he was talking about 74% of incidents that they're observing come through social engineering. That's very much this kind of thing. It's spreading through targeting the user, targeting the curiosity of the human. That's ultimately the big thing to take away. Bottom line up front, so this is something I took from a previous career. You might have come across this one actually. Bluff. It's essentially an executive summary. So what are the three things that you need to take away from this presentation? If you can remember three things from every presentation you've had today, you're probably doing quite well. So the first thing is that, again, it's sophisticated social engineering. It stands out through its ability to propagate, leveraging these really interesting tricks to force a user or coerce a user into actually accepting this fake browser update. And that starts the whole process right from the get-go. It's modular and stealthy in design, so really designed to be easily customizable, allowing your cyber criminals, whoever's using it, to adapt it to whatever their motivation might be. So it might be to drops spyware, a key logger, data exfiltration tools. Obviously data extortion is a really common thing that we're observing in the last few years. A lot of these extortion groups are kind of pivoting away from ransomware, just stealing your data and then using that to extort you. The SocGhoulish can achieve this. It can assist the threat actor in achieving this. So very modular and kind of stealthy in what it can do. And then also its widespread distribution and collaboration through different cyber criminal groups. So again, we've seen this spread on dark web forums, on marketplaces, actors sharing how to use it, changing its behavior, and that's probably why it's been around, since 2019. So it really has that effectiveness and that prevalence within the cyber threat landscape. In terms of a typical kill chain, it pretty much looks like this. So you'll start with the initial compromise of a legitimate website. So that might be through the theft of a web administrator's credentials. It might be injecting third-party scripts onto a website. It might be just exploiting a vulnerability that's exposed. But whatever way it happens, the website is compromised. The user is then directed to this website, potentially through like a spear phishing mail or something of that nature. And then they will be given this fake update prompt. So the compromised websites will display a pop-up message or a banner that basically mimics a legitimate software. Oh, someone's taking a post-it now. But it pops up with this browser update. It might be Chrome, Firefox, whatever it might be. And then believing that the update is legitimate, the user then clicks on that prompt to download the supposed update, and then the actual attack cycle starts. The user then executes the downloaded file, believing it's to be legitimate, and then this executed file installs the initial payload onto the user's system. And it's pretty much as simple as that. There might be persistence mechanisms that are built into this, potentially modifying system settings, using other techniques to make sure that it runs on system reboot. But it's a pretty simple kill chain. But again, the social engineering is what makes it tick. So this is just an example of one of the typical fake updates you'll see. It might be Chrome, it might be Firefox, Safari, whatever it might be, this is the kind of thing that they're using. And obviously, if the user thinks it's a legitimate website, there's no reason that they would go, okay, well, I don't need to install this. I'll just, go ahead with it. But this is what SocGhoulish is leveraging. It's the user error. So in terms of a new infection chain, in the first quarter of this year, so February, we observed several suspicious incidents that we attributed to SocGhoulish. And when reviewing the execution of the first stage payload, we saw this behavioral change, essentially using Python as a method for persistence. So once the initial file is dropped and installed on a victim's computer, much in the same way that we observed in the last kill chain, the execution is made via WScript, and then we see these new behaviors kick in. So the first one is the process begins with downloading the latest version of Python from the official Python repository. And after confirming this and listing the download directory, the contents of the zip file are then extracted to a specific folder. This original zip file is then deleted, and the contents of the extracted folder are listed to make sure everything's in place. We then see the renaming of a temporary file that contains malicious code, so malicious Python code, and then a scheduled task is created, essentially to run hidden Python scripts every 5 minutes, and that then connects out to one of the attacker-controlled IP addresses. So essentially what they're doing, they're downloading and extracting Python, they've named it here 3.1.2, I guess that's the most up-to-date one, renaming a temporary code that contains malicious script, and then they're connecting to a suspicious IP address. And this new finding is just, further evidence of that kind of cat and mouse game between defenders and attackers. Obviously they're changing their behaviors based upon what we're doing. So this is just another kind of behavioral change that we observed. So we've released quite a few reports on SocGhoulish. So on the left-hand side, I think that was from the end of last year. That was the first one we did. And on the right-hand side is this new infection chain that I just went over. Highly recommend going and checking these out. We have new blogs on the site every day, so definitely go and check these out at reliacross.com. And in terms of malware loader activity in general, this graph basically represents the total observations of malware loaders from the 1st of January this year to the 9th. So you can see SocGhoulish was representing over 70% of the malware loader activity that we'd observed between this time period. And one of the really interesting things I want to point out on this is we released a report last year right before the takedown of the Quackbot infrastructure, or Qbot that you might have heard of. And at that time, SocGhoulish was around 33% of the total activity. And once Quackbot was taken down, you had this void. This void happens quite often in the aftermath of these law enforcement operations. You have a period in which some of the other groups, or in this time, a malware loader actually steps up to the plate and fills that void. And we can just see that with SocGhoulish. You have the other malware loaders on there, so Goop Loader, Raspberry Robin, GU Loader. They all represent a significant threat as well. But we can just see that the overwhelming majority of what we're seeing from a malware loader perspective is coming from SocGhoulish. So interesting point. And then this is just a slide. So I took this graphic off of our Q2 ransomware report. So basically it demonstrates the total numbers of organizations posted onto distinct ransomware groups' data leak sites. Obviously that doesn't account for every victim because a lot of them will pay the ransom. A huge percentage will pay ransom and then not get posted and named and shamed. But it's been a bit of a tumultuous time for ransomware activity because we have seen a greater tempo of law enforcement activity. So we had, I think it was Hive last year, at tail end of last year. We had Alfie, which were kind of like the runners-up, if you like, in ransomware activity. And then obviously Lockbit. Lockbit, they're an interesting one. They have shown resilience. And even though they're by and far still the market leader, their output is actually significantly reduced. So we do see a really good effect from these law enforcement operations. But again, it's kind of like whack-a-mole. When we take these groups down, they're just going to resurface in a new rebranded or renamed effort. The affiliates will move to a new program. It's just very, very difficult to take down with any real longevity. And the key point at the bottom there again is just malware loaders are really playing an increasing role within this activity. They're significantly turning to the likes of SocGhoulish to enable initial access. So recommendations, realistically, I could put up like so much here, but I kind of thought, enhancing visibility is the key point. You can't protect what you don't know exists. So just making sure you've got adequate visibility of all your endpoints. Events like, process execution, registry modification, these are a good place to start. These logs you need to be collecting. You need to have really good network telemetry. I put GPO in there as well. So configuring Notepad to be the default application that JavaScript files open in, that can be a really useful way of stopping many of these JavaScript-based malwares from actually going places and doing bad things. And then the last thing on there is really just training staff. Like that sounds like such a high level kind of cliched answer, but your staff need to know what social engineering can do. They need to understand what are the common ways in which threat actors are actually, masquerading and which are tricking users. And also having a culture in which your users have the confidence to report something. They need to have the confidence to report something. They need to know that they're not going to be condemned, that they're not going to be, reprimanded if they've done something wrong. Like, have the confidence to actually report something. If they've landed on a website that has, something like this and it appears suspicious, don't just click off it. Make sure it gets reported. If you receive a phishing email, don't just delete it. Make sure it goes to your security team. These are the basic things that can make all the difference. And then the last thing I just want to mention, so this is something I took off of our annual threat report. So this is ReliaQuest's version of the Verizon DBIR, if you've ever read that. Fantastic report. We found that organizations who opted to leverage some level of AI and automation within their incident response, they saw a reduction in their mean time to resolve to 58 minutes, which was a 98% decrease, which is just a staggering statistic, absolutely staggering. So this could be I mean, it could be anything really, but things that crop up for me are like, if you have a user who finds out their credentials have been compromised, like automatically rotating them. There doesn't need to be any delay in that, automatically rotating them. If you have a session in which you detect 2 or more users all actively logged into it, making sure that gets terminated. These are the real things that can make such a difference from a timeliness perspective and can really stop a lot of these commodity threats in their tracks. So automation is something I'll definitely bang the drum on. You just have to get on board with this because you'll get left behind in the walls. That brings me to the end. I know I'm quite quick on the time today, but it has been quite a long afternoon, right? So maybe not the worst thing in the world, but if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Sure.
Given the sort of prevalence of it as sort of stage mode, what's the challenges in actually detecting it in the first instance? Why is it not just on standard AV just getting picked up immediately?
It's because of those obfuscation techniques that they're using. So it's the methods that they get around your sort of typical endpoint telemetry and security devices. So the use of Python, that was a really interesting one because you just wouldn't assume that would be malicious. You would think that would be just like regular routine behavior. And obviously they're going on to what appear to be legitimate websites that wouldn't flag up that it's malicious in the first place. So there's a lot of different techniques they use, but it's those kind of combination of social engineering, which is difficult to detect, and behaviors that they use to kind of side skirt your typical endpoint detection, really. So it's a combination of those factors, I think. Sure.
How is Python used for persistence?
Python. So obviously when they're reaching out, when they have that command and control, that's essentially how they're using it. So when they're stepping outside and using Python, I need to come back to you on this. I need to come back to you with a better answer on that. Yeah. Let me come back to you on that one. Sure.
It's sort of following on from that one a little bit, but the choice to actually use Python rather than standard living land techniques going out. What would the driver behind that have something to do with just being able to do more stuff? Or something those lines?
Well, I mean, obviously Python is your most commonly used. So I would imagine it's probably enabling them to do more based upon those facts. And again, it probably comes back to the fact that they're less likely to be detected as malicious. There's lots of different changes. I've only represented one on here, but this is a really modular and customizable attack framework. So there's lots of different ways in which they can kind of side skirt around your usual detection. So it's probably that factor really that they can do more, as you alluded to. Yeah. I will come back to you on that question though.
You mentioned Lockbit, and obviously they were hit over the back of the head by large law enforcement.
Yeah.
Have you seen some of the other industry reports that say that Lockbit are not as dead as the operation may succeed?
Yeah.
And the statistics that say that there's been like a 600% increase in outbreaks of Lockbit itself. So clearly it's not quite as dead. Do you know if Lockbit are using, sorry, I finally get to a semblance point. Do you know if Lockbit is, or some instances of Lockbit are using SocGhoulish themselves?
That's a good question. I know that they have been associated with malware loader activity in general. I'm not sure if we've detected them with SocGhoulish specifically. The original point was on the activity levels.
Yeah.
So we're still seeing that they're the market leader. We're still seeing that they're the most active group. But it is still a massive step back from where they were last year. There's clearly been an impact on their confidence of the affiliates. Like the Lockbit brand has taken a massive kicking because a lot of these affiliates will be thinking they're now compromised by law enforcement and security researchers. Obviously, they had the post regarding the US Federal Reserve recently, which turned out to be bogus. And we saw a lot of posts on like cyber criminal forums saying, you need to stop with these speculative things because you're losing confidence or you're going to lose more members if you make ridiculous claims like this. So I think their reputation was taking a bit of a kicking.
I think from my perspective, they gave out like a snarl because they'd been crept up on and someone had hit them over the back of their head with a frying pan. When your first instinct is to bare your teeth at everyone around you.
It was reactionary, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they all do this. These ransomware groups, they'll post things that are fantastical, speculative.
It's great bedtime reading because it's absolutely hysterical. But
yeah, we have to try to find line in here because we all find it interesting, but we also need to recognise these groups are horrible and they're doing like genuinely terrible things. And a lot of these organisations that are targeted by ransomware, they don't recover. I'd love to get a percentage on how many don't recover. Because it just highlights the scale of the threat, really. But any other questions?
One of my friends called me to remove malware from their laptop. I connected remotely to see if any malware on the laptop, and I didn't find any, but what I found was push notifications with all this, you have virus from different websites.
Yep.
And when you visit such malicious websites, they just ask you, yes, no, if you allow these push notifications, and they just every week, like...
It's almost like alert fatigue? Yeah. So it almost becomes something you see all the time, so you just don't actually see the real threat that is surfacing. Interesting. Okay. It's another way of getting around it, I suppose. Alert fatigue. Any other questions? John?
Does a malware loader require elevation, or does it run as a standard user?
Elevation, or it runs as a standard
Does
user?
it require an admin,
elevating privileges?
That operate, can a standard user also?
So once the initial infections happens, that can target a regular user, but their end goal is to get onto an elevated account. Yeah, absolutely.
So the user without admin rights can run that and...
It becomes a part of your typical attack chain. Right. So initial access happens, and then obviously their end goal is to elevate privileges and then move on to a more privileged account. Yeah.
Some malware utilize this privilege escalation that's used by some legitimate software like Adobe, some other stuff, and they just somehow, exploit or utilize this breaching system and trying to get initial access.
Sure. Cool.
One final one from me.
Yep.
Is it always a explicit download and execution for SocGhoulish, or is it sometimes drive-by download where the JS is loaded into temp files and that's in surprise you've got?
Say the question one more time.
Is it always explicit download of a compromised file based on social engineering, or is it also hosted on some kind of content delivery network and then by download?
It can depend. The most common delivery method that we do see is your drive-by download and those fake updates. That's probably why it's more commonly known as that. But there are additional ways they can do it, like this, your standard spear phishing emails, things like that. So there's lots of different ways in which it can kind of propagate.
Nice.
Cool.
Well, not nice, but...
I know what you're saying, yeah. Got you. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Really appreciate your time. Look forward to catching up with you in the drinks later, but thanks very much.